Good morning, it's Valerie Ling. I am a clinical psychologist, very often talking about my pet topic of burnout, but today coming to you really just as a regular psychologist, offering a rationale, if you'd like, for why it is that you may be actually feeling more anxious during this period of COVID-19. So, the first thing for me to say is that anxiety has an adaptive mechanism, right? So, it is an emotion when it is not a disorder, as an emotional reaction. Anxiety provides us with the ability to take the temperature for how things are going and provides a signal that something may not be right in our world. There can be some internal cues that provide us that message. Our heart rate increases. We feel a little jittery. Sometimes our vision is impaired. We might feel a little dizzy, sort of at the extreme ends of anxiety. And that's because somehow your mind has appraised a situation where you are feeling that you are under threat, right? So, classic example that gets thrown around when people talk about anxiety is if you were walking down the road and you encountered a dog that had its teeth were showing and it was barking and it was moving towards you in an aggressive way. Your mind basically shortcuts a couple of mechanisms. It doesn't stay in that space doing an analysis or a cost benefit projection as to what to do. It basically kickstarts an alarm system that pumps a bunch of chemistry into you, gets your oxygen levels going, and prepares you to either fight what's in front of you, run away from what's in front of you, and sometimes actually to freeze as a mechanism to survive. The thinking being that if you are under threat, those three responses may protect you. If you run away from the threat, if you fight the threat, or if you freeze, sometimes that may also mean that the animal in front of you may perceive that you are not alive and leave you alone. So, anxiety at the threat level provides us with some protective mechanisms because it helps us not to waste time, but to give us an adaptive response to a real threat. Now, anxiety at lower levels of the spectrum, where we have the ability to appraise a situation and say, well, that's really not an animal charging at me. I'm not really in a life or death threatening situation. What it is that perhaps I'm afraid I'm not going to get something in on time, or I'm worried about a particular outcome, provides us with a bit of a spike in our emotional baseline to say, you need to think about this. There's something coming up that's bothering you. And it's meant to basically activate a problem solving mechanism, a kind of a fight response, I suppose, at a lower level, which is to say that here's the problem that I'm facing. What I actually need to get myself out of here. And when we problem solve that, then our emotional state comes down to a resting state. And that's when anxiety has been a friend, a baseline friend. Now, at the spectrum of when things become an anxiety disorder is usually when those levels of anxiety or the alarm bells that are going on in your brain cannot be switched off regardless of what is in front of you. It starts to impact your sleep. You start to feel excessive worry. Some people experience headaches and symptoms of panic, like as if they can't breathe or they're experiencing a heart attack. And the waves of anxiety just don't seem to subside. And when we get to that level and it's significantly impacting our well being and our ability to function, there's probably something more than a transient emotion of anxiety. All right. So, in general, the way that we face anxiety is to basically look at the reality of what we are anticipating is going to happen to us. Because a lot of the time, psychological anxiety isn't linked to an actual visible, tangible threat that is right in front of us. It's often linked to either an unresolvable immediate situation that is out of our control, and therefore none of those mechanisms are really going to help us because they will freeze us in a perpetual state of threat. Right. So, an example being classically what's happening now in COVID-19. There are some things that we can do to stay safe, but by and large, we can't predict when the government is going to lift the bans. We can't actually predict the course of the disease in terms of how long it's going to take, right? So, when our anxiety, therefore, hasn't got the ability to exercise a degree of control, it remains frozen in that state. So when anxiety doesn't have a way to come to an immediate solution so that we can come down to baseline, then anxiety will just perpetuate. So one of the reasons why this probably is becoming more and more of an issue is linked to what we actually need to bring our anxiety down to baselines. Number one, quite a lot of time, it's a helpful thing to discharge anxiety and the levels of chemistry that is in our body through exercise, through moving, through getting our body out of a frozen state, right? Us sitting in front of computers, us being at home cooped up, just perpetuates to our body a sense that we are trapped. We are frozen in a state of helplessness. And so, without being active, that's one of the ways that we could discharge the stress and the anxiety. If we're not doing that, that doesn't help. The other thing is the overexposure to statistics and data that increases our mind's appraisal that we must be under threat if we are getting constant messages of danger and disease, right? So it's an overemphasis on the likelihood that risk is still around us. So if we are washing our hands and doing the things that are going to keep us safe and physical distancing, that's our experience of keeping safe. However, if we are constantly bombarded by a cyber reality, that is not enough, right? Because we are feeding our mind with information that just exaggerates the threat. Then remember how I was saying that anxiety is a survival mechanism that bypasses largely cognitive processing. It's going to escalate straight away that we must be under threat. So overexposure to information escalates the appraisal of risk in our world. The other reason why anxiety is on the rise is because there's a kind of it impacts our sense of normal, of what what is the world going to look like. It also comes with additional stress if we are actually losing our jobs, if we are in fact having a less livelihood, if we feel like we're not coping because we're doing children at home, if we feel like we're not equipped to actually do the things that have been placed upon us. So the thing is, when we have heightened levels of distress, so when we are not able to bring our anxiety to baselines, we're also unable to engage in not only self-soothing, but also problem solving, right? That other important part of actually why anxiety exists. It exists to give us some information that says that, okay, we need to problem solve our way out of that. Problem solving requires being able to dig into a level of resilience, resourcefulness, and creativity to figure out what we need to do to actually go that next step if we don't have work, if we're needing X amount of dollars to make payments, help-seeking behavior, if we need to overcome our sense of inferiority or not wanting to bother people, that emotional resilience to go that next step, then to problem solve, to overcome our fear of seeking help. Being in physical distancing and being isolated also adds to that, because what then happens is we don't get feedback from others that people will help us. We're not sharing, we're not talking about what we're experiencing to the point where others can come into the picture and say, I'm going through the same thing as well. Or how about we take our minds off this together? Or how about we, have a cup of coffee together and just have a change of scenery? And so there's a couple of these things, therefore, that would help to ease anxiety. The mechanism of over escalation of risk and sense of threat continues because we are bombarded by information that's coming at us. Our ability to bring that to baseline has also been reduced through the normal mechanisms that we might have to manage our anxiety. And so, what then happens is we get stuck in this anxiety cycle of just the waves of anxiety circulating and going around and around and around without our ability. So, what to do about it? The first thing really to do about it is to de escalate the sense that risk and imminent danger is around you. You know the scripts for what keeps you safe: the hand washing, the physical distancing, reducing what we are doing in our everyday lives to contain it. And if we actually look at the statistics at the moment, particularly in Australia and New South Wales, we can see that the things that we are doing as a community is actually helping. So reduce exposure to information, make it just maybe once a day for just what you need to know. Tell yourself that what you're doing is the best that you can do if you are doing those things. And then engage in the things that help to bring those alarm bells down to baseline: the exercise, the reaching out for support, doing other things, getting a sense that your world and your life is normal, getting out of the house as well to get a different sense of perspective that you don't feel like you're in prison. These are things that will help as well. Now, if you're finding, however, that is not enough to unlock your natural resources, particularly what is needed to actually tap into here, the catastrophic thinking, the mindset issues that are perpetuating the sense of risk, it's time to get help. Don't sit in distress. Anxiety is really, really treatable, particularly when it's actually linked to a situation that we're all going through. Seeking professional help is a great way to take steps forward now to get that under control. All right, take care.